So while we give folks that 2-minute period of grace, if you can just pop in the chat and tell us where you're coming from so Marita can see all how far you came to engage in this craft talk. We'd love to see where you're coming from. And we'd also like it if you are a fellow from the summer, if you can let us know if you're currently with us during our Howard Writers Week, if you were with us at Rutgers or Virginia Tech or one of our virtual attendees, fellows. Okay, Mauricio, we have folks come from, of course, the D to the C. I love that, Dion.
Yeah.
Augusta, Georgia.
Boston. That's
yes. Great. Richmond, Virginia, Los Angeles, More, Ohio, Suffolk, Virginia, Dallas, Georgia. Oh, it's so wonderful. Currently a fellow Yinka. Oh, wonderful. So, and I see a lot of familiar faces as well. Oh, Nzinga, I see you. I'm supporting my dad, Knox Tull, here in DC, who is preparing to write a memoir. I love that. All right, Pennsylvania. So I'm going to get started. Is it 6:02 yet?
You don't take any prisoners, do you?
Just press, because I know folks don't want to hear me or see me, but I want you deserve a formal introduction. So that's what my job is here today. So I am going to introduce our guest of honor today. And I just want to welcome everyone for joining us. Thank you for attending our last event that is part of our 2022 Summer of Writing series that has included in-person and virtual readings, professional development panel discussions, and craft talks. My name is Dr. Khadija Ali Coleman. I'm the Executive Director of Hurston Wright Foundation, and I'm so happy that you are here tonight. Tonight's event is one of 10 events that have been offered this summer since June 20th, while we have implemented our Hurston Wright Writers Week workshop retreats virtually and on the campuses of Virginia Tech, Rutgers University, Newark, and Howard University, where we are this week. Special thank you to our sponsors and partners, including Hachette Book Group, DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, the Poetry Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, and Amazon. Additional thanks to our instructors this summer, including Keisha Bush, Damaris Hill, Monifa Love, Monda Raquel Webb, Shayla Laws, Destiny O. Birdsong, Ravi Howard, Devin Renee, Laura Jean Carter, and Kiki Petrozzini. Tonight's craft talk on memoir writing is presented by Marita Golden. Marita Golden is the author of 19 works of fiction and nonfiction. Her most recent work of nonfiction is The Strong Black Woman: How a Myth Endangers the Physical and Mental Health of Black Women. She is the recipient of many awards, including the Writers for Writers Award presented by Barnes & Noble and Poets and Writers, an award from the Authors Guild, and Fiction Award for her novel, After, awarded by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. She has lectured and read from her work internationally. She is the co-founder and president emerita of the Zora Neale Hurston Richard Wright Foundation. And Marita Golden is a veteran teacher of writing. She taught at the University of Lagos in Nigeria and has served as a member of the faculties of MFA Graduate Creative Writing programs at George Mason University and Virginia Commonwealth University. She has served as Distinguished Writer in Residence within the MA Creative Writing program at Johns Hopkins University and Prince George's Community College and the University of the District of Columbia. As a literary consultant, she offers writing workshops, coaching, and manuscript evaluation services. Please welcome, for today's event, Marita Golden.
Thank you, Khadija. First, before I do anything, I really want to thank Khadija, Dr. Khadija Coleman, and the board of the foundation for all the work they continue to do to keep this really important organization, not just going, but thriving and able to offer every year wonderful programs that keep pushing the button and moving the conversation forward in terms of writing and how we can serve Black writers. So I really have to take my hat off to this new generation of leadership. When Clyde McIlvaine and I started the organization back in 1990, that was probably at that point one of the bravest, boldest decisions I've made. And I think the next bravest, boldest decision I made, that Clyde and I made, was to step aside and to create a space for the new generation of leadership. I personally never believed in the what I call the Idi Amin school of leadership, where you lead forever. And so I've been just very pleased to be President Emerita and to be called on to advise and to be part of the programs in this way. But I'm just really excited about tonight. I'm excited about particularly getting the opportunity to talk with those of you in attendance about memoir, about what you're writing, how you're writing, why you're writing, and the challenges and the joys of memoir. Memoir is a form that's very, very dear to my heart. In a way, memoir has given me my life. It's given me a way to understand my life, to make sense of my life, and through memoir to reach out to others. And I think that this is an exciting time to be writing a memoir. Some people call memoir the novel of the 21st century because of its stature, because of its place in the culture, and because of the way that both writers and readers respond to it with so much excitement and find so much in the form that they can positively relate to and learn. I wrote my first memoir, Migrations of the Heart. It was published in 1983 when I was 33 years old. And in the intervening years, I've gone back and forth between fiction and memoir, fiction and nonfiction. And in my book, Don't Play in the Sun, in my book, Saving Our Sons, and in my most recent book, The Strong Black Woman, I mixed memoir with essay, with reportage and journalism in a form that I like to call communal memoir. That is, taking a topic and meditating on it personally in the voices of individuals in our community to expand the conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit from an essay that I'm in the process of writing about what it's meant to be involved in writing and teaching memoir for 30 plus years. And then I'm going to read 2 paragraphs from Migrations of the Heart, my first book, my memoir, and talk about the structure, talk about the decisions that I made in terms of writing it and what I was trying to do. So this is an essay, as I said, that's a work in progress. And I'm ruminating about a lot of things, about the form, about teaching, about the very talented writers that I've worked with. And I just want to read 3 short paragraphs to kind of set up the conversation that we're going to have. I've been teaching and writing memoir for over 3 decades. This intense, enduring, and deeply satisfying involvement with the genre has revealed to me its essential truth. No one writes a memoir by choice. Memoir is arduous and frightening in ways unique to the requirements of the form when practiced with skill, artistry, and courage. I'm a teacher of writing, but for me, psychology is as crucial as craft in the creation of a meaningful narrative. I encourage writers working on memoirs to master the art of good writing, but I insist as well that they master the art of being brave. The word brave conjures images of soldiers under fire or the actions of the quick thinking, stepping in to save someone's life, sometimes at great personal risk. Bravery is a word rarely, if ever, used in the discussion of the writing process. However, it's a word that I use all the time when talking about my writing process and the writing process of those I work with. It's my safe word, my North Star, reorienting me when I feel myself shrinking in the face of the need to reveal a personal truth with radical honesty and tenderness, a combination that may sound oxymoronic, but that is the elixir that elevates memoir to literature. Brave, I tell my writers, be brave or go home. The bravery I suggest is thoughtful, curious, and compassionate, as it positions the writer in the potential line of fire of disgruntled family members whose lives intersected with theirs and whose lives therefore belong to the writer as well. And I'm really looking forward for a conversation with you all about our families, how to write about this entity, the family, that has both nurtured us, loved us, and wounded us. When I write memoir, I'm making art. And because I'm making art, I use my imagination. We instinctively know what art is in all its forms. We instinctively know what art in all of its forms does to us and for us. As we write, we often wonder how we can remember and recall events, dates, names, places with precision. But precision is both overrated and unnecessary. Imagination unleashes memory, emotion, feelings, fears, and dreams. Emotion, feelings, fears, and dreams possess their own precision. We imagine ourselves into empathy. We imagine context, explanation, and justification for choices that unexamined seem confounding. While writing about my mother and how she inflicted her colorist wounds on me, I entered her skin and the skin of her life through imagination. Imagination was the superpower that made that possible. In writing about how my mother nurtured my creativity and told me that I was going to write a book one day, I used my imagination to envision what might have been her deepest, unfulfilled ambitions and desires. Imagination in the service of truth and beauty never fails. Imagination used in writing memoir makes people and their lived lives dimensional, complicated. It makes of those lives what we call art. But first and foremost, a memoir is a story. Yes, it is your life, but it's a story. And you, as the subject and the author, are writing regularly, intensely, with intent to discover what the story is. The story arises from regular meditation on, regular inquisition of, and regular questioning of what your story is, what your story could possibly be, its limits and boundaries. There are thousands of words that will be written in search of the story, the dramatic arc, the theme. Each word is important. Each word is valuable. Even the words that are deleted, revised, rethought, and rewritten, especially the words that are deleted, revised, rethought, and rewritten. Those are the words that bring you closer to an understanding of the essence of your narrative. Writing Migrations of the Heart, I knew I wanted to document what it meant to come of age in the 1960s, when a world of long denied opportunities for African Americans was finally possible as a result of a century or more of relentless activism. I knew that I wanted to document what it meant to go to Nigeria with a heart bursting with romantic notions and have that romanticism tested and tried. I knew that I wanted to document what it meant to be a woman creating and finding her identity in the world over and over again, and what all that said about family and society and relationships. I was writing for myself, but also for the generations of readers who could not possibly know what I had come to know. I was writing so they would know. I knew that my personal history was an echo of history as we define it and study it. I wrote my way into that knowledge day after day. I wrote my way into an understanding day after day of what all that had happened to me meant for me and for anyone who read my story. Now, in this last paragraph, there were a lot of I knew. And while I did know a lot, I knew what I wanted my story to be about. I did not know how to write it until I regularly sat down and faced the page. I'll never forget one time, one evening being in my apartment and just in frustration, going to my bookshelf and pulling down Maya Angelou's memoir and Langston Hughes's memoirs, which I had come to love, thumbing through them and hoping that they would tell me how to write my story. And of course, I found that they could not tell me how to write my story, but they could confirm that it was possible for me to write my story. And even though I've talked a lot about what I knew and what I did, very often we don't know, and very often we may find ourselves blocked and stalled. And I think that being blocked and being stalled is part of the writing process. I think as long as this story has not been abandoned by you, it is in gestation. And so the silences, the darkness, the blockages, the stalling are all part of your process. And so sometimes writers will feel as though they failed if they're blocked. Sometimes you're blocked because you're afraid, but hold on to your belief in the story and you will get to a point of deep belief and deep faith in your story. I want to look now, as I said, at two sections from Migrations of the Heart. And, you know, this is a book that I wrote when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And the seminal event of my life is the loss of my parents. My mother died when I was 21 of a stroke. My father died of a heart attack when I was 23. And my mother and my father were the most important people that made me a writer. My mother told me I was going to write a book one day when I was 12, and my father raised me on stories. And so the fact that they died before they got to witness my manifesting their dreams for me, dreams that they had made part of my heart, was absolutely devastating. And a lot of times when we're trying to figure out what is the meaning of our memoir, you think about what's the singular event of my childhood? What happened to me that rippled out into the eddies of my life that shaped so much? And the death of my parents when I was so young affected who I chose to love, where I chose to live. And I began writing this book. I began the book with them by introducing the reader to them. I now know because I was still grieving them. And writing was a way back to them. My writing was a way to reclaim them and hold them dear to me. So I'm going to read the opening paragraph, which is about my father. And I'll talk about the choices that I made there and why I made those structural and writing choices. And then I'll read a section about my mother and I'll do the same thing. And this is these are the first 3 paragraphs of Migrations of the Heart. My father was the first man I ever loved. He was as assured as a panther. His ebony skin was soft as the surface of coal. The vigorous scent of El Producto cigars was a perfume that clung to him. The worn leather seat of his taxi, a stubborn aroma, had seeped into his pores, and like a baptism, the smells rubbed onto me from the palms of his hands. In school, he went as far as the 6th grade, then learned the rest on his own. Part of the rest he bequeathed to me, gold nuggets of fact, myth, legend, dropped in the lap of my mind, shiny new pennies meant to be saved. By his own definition, he was a Black man and proud of it. Arming me with a measure of this conviction, he unfolded a richly colored tapestry, savored its silken texture, and warned me never to forget its worth. Africa, it wasn't dark until the white man got there. Cleopatra, I don't care what they tell you. In school, she was a Black woman. Hannibal, he crossed the Alps with an army of 500 elephants. The Sphinx, pointing with a tobacco-stained index finger to a page in the encyclopedia. Look at the nose. See how broad it is? That's your nose. That's my nose too. Bitter, frightening tales of slavery dredged by his great-great-grandparents from memories that refused to be mute. Passed to him, passed to me. And so I open with my father because my father was my first writing teacher. My father was a storyteller, and I am telling you a story. And this is a story partly set on the continent of Africa. And so I go back to the stories of Africa that my father told me. It's very important that the reader gets specific, a very specific and vivid sense of my father. And so I quote my father. I quote the things that he said to me. And in the narrative section of that, there's a section where I say that he's arming me with his convictions. And I speak of his hands on me as a baptism. And so that he's baptizing me into the belief that as a little Black girl, I can be proud. That as a Black person, there is much to my history. There is much to my legacy. And so I'm using these quotes from my father to sear into the brain, the memory, and hopefully the heart of the reader, just who my father was and how magnificent in some ways he was, despite the fact that he only went to the 6th grade. And then I write in the opening pages about my mother. And I want to talk for a minute about how I researched my mother. Now, my parents at the time I wrote this were dead. And so I went to one of my mother's best friends who had known her forever. And I said to this woman who, after my mother's death, became my surrogate mother, tell me who my mother was before she was my mother. And she told me. She knew everything. She knew all my mother's secrets. And what she told me allowed me to get under the skin of my mother's life. And one of the most important things my mother did was to leave the South, to leave Greensboro, North Carolina, for Washington, D.C. And from this friend, I learned that my mother had left without telling anyone, that in a sense, she was fleeing. And so I then gave myself permission to imagine and to ask myself, what was that night like when my mother left home without telling anyone that she was leaving? What was she fleeing? What did she think she was running to? And so this is where imagination came in. And the reader of a memoir figures that you have created a contract with them, a contract of trust. They are trusting you to tell the emotional truth. The reader of a memoir doesn't need facts. They need a story that has integrity, a story that is founded on emotional truth. And that is where the bond between the reader and the writer comes from. And so I'm going to read a little section from the scene where I imagine my mother. And I said, what would my mother have been wearing? So I did research. I researched what the styles were, the year that she went back home in the 30s. You know, what kind of car would she have driven? And there was a lot that I didn't know. But as you hear this scene, remember that I did know my grandmother very well. I knew how unflappable she was and how she wasn't impressed by anything. I knew my mother would have taken great pride in being able to drive back to Greensboro in her own 1935 Ford. And so I knew these two women. I don't know what happened between them on that porch, but I knew them very well. And that gave my imagination the kind of integrity required to write this scene. Washington, D.C., after my mother left, was as far north as she got. There, she settled with a cousin who'd arrived the year before. Her first job was cleaning government office buildings, but soon she discovered more gratifying outlets for her industry. Driven by caution, she scrupulously saved her earnings, yet daringly, shrewdly bet small amounts on the numbers, the lottery of that day. She hit them regularly and plowed the winnings into property. Soon, she owned 4 boarding houses and leased 2 others, a material affluence which at that time equaled a virtual empire for a Black woman. Indeed, my mother was blessed, for she had her own. Each month, when she wrote her parents, she slipped a money order between the pages of the folded letter. And 7 years after her arrival, in the city dotted with historical monuments and scarred by Jim Crow laws, my mother drove prosperous and proud back to Greensboro in her own 1935 Ford. Her mother sat on the porch in a rocking chair, stringing beans that afternoon. Her feet touched the littered boards and she set the bowl of beans on the table beside her, stood up and clutched the banister. Beatrice, whose car that you driving? She called out with only modest interest. It's mine, Mama, her daughter called back, parking the car before the house with considerable skill. Yours? Yes, Mama, mine. My mother was now walking dramatically up the steps to the porch. She wore a dark purple suit and a hat that resembled a box was perched on her head. Her hands held white gloves and a small brown leather clutch bag. You want to go for a ride? She asked, delighted to be offering such a treat. Her mother, who had witnessed greater miracles than this every Sunday in church, merely folded her arms and shook her head in disgruntled amazement. Beatrice, can't you write your own folks no more? It's been 3 months since we last heard from you. And so I gave myself permission to lovingly imagine a scene between 2 women that I did know very well. And so that's what I mean by imagining your way into empathy, imagining your way into understanding, imagining your way into context, because the most powerful memoirs are lodged in our hearts, our souls, our imagination, meditating on our reality and our experience. So at this point, we're about halfway through, and I would like to open it now just to take some questions and to engage you all. There's more that I can say, and I will say, but I really want to hear from you, what questions you have for me. And also, I just want to hear what you guys are writing.
Oh, you got it.
Hello, my name is Knox Tull. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Good.
Khadija, who's handling this? I'm just whatever.
It's a philosophical question. You are a very talented writer.
Thank you.
I've read just about all of your books. So I could never write as I'm trying to write my memoir.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm nowhere near your skill. And so I want to just ask generally, what do you think about using ghostwriters or professional assistants to help you write your memoir?
Okay.
Especially because we can't be brilliant like.
Well, first,
Marita Golden.
I want to say that every voice is unique. When I'm writing, I'm striving to write first one beautiful sentence, and then a second beautiful sentence, and then another beautiful sentence. Because I have very high ambitions, it pushes me to really work hard on my writing. And I don't think that you should be intimidated by any other writer. You have your unique voice. And before I would say, go get a ghostwriter, I would say, spend some time discovering your voice. Spend some time listening to the story. Now you can do that. I don't know, what the story is about, but you can do that. But I just hate to hear people, say, I could never write. Of course, you're not going to write like me, but you're going to write like you. And your beauty, your authenticity is going to have your sound, not my sound. So that's the first thing I would, because I'm going to tell you, writing is so hard, but it's so wonderful. It's so arduous, but it's so much fun. It's a puzzle you're trying to solve. And so if you can make a commitment to trying to write, there is so much that you will learn about yourself and about writing from trying to write. Now, having said that, you can certainly go ahead and work with someone who will write your story for you. And that's all I can say. But it means that you're going to have to work with that person. They're going to interview you, they'll do a first draft, a second draft. So it will be a collaborative process. They may do the writing, but you're going to be doing the editing. You're going to be doing the correcting. So you will still have to be part of it. Does that answer your question?
Yes. It's so rare when you ask a question and you get an informed answer these days. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question?
It looks like we have Janice Littlejohn is raising her hand. So you can go ahead.
Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry that I don't have my camera on, but I wanted to first thank you for this opportunity to talk to you and for that you've contributed to literature. I'm working on a memoir about my grandmother who died in childbirth. Was 10. I'm exploring it in a way that connects to the current Black maternal health story. A lot of my grandmothers, knowing that my grandmother died in childbirth really did impact my decision to live child-free. So much so that I terminated a pregnancy while I was married many years ago. It's a story that I have not shared with my mother, who is still living. She's 82 now. And I'm trying to figure out if this is a story I need to share, because I think that it might hurt her. But I was trying to figure out how you ride the line between telling your absolute truth and saving face for those that you love, I guess is what my question is.
Right. Well, the first, one of the first sentences that I read from the piece is that nobody writes a memoir by choice. We write memoirs, I think, because we're at a point in our lives where if we don't write the story, we simply cannot go on. That is a life lived not looking back at something that happened to us, some choice we made, seems to be a life not worth living. And so if a story has that hold on you, I think you have to honor the call of that story. Now, one of a book that I recommend often to people who are writing memoir is this book. It's The Art of Memoir by Mary Karr, Mary Karr. And she's a best-selling author of 3 memoirs. And the book is just terrific because she deals with pretty much everything that you can think about writing a memoir, all the tough questions. And she seems to have read every memoir that was ever written. And it's written in a very, very conversational but informative style. And she talks in the book about how it is possible to engage our family members in the process of writing our truth. You can simply say to family or to mothers or whoever, I have to write this book. And I'm going to write this book because if I don't, I won't be healthy. I won't be free. But I want to engage you, mother, brother, sister, father. I want to engage you, if I can, in this very important process. I want to write my truth, but your truth may be part of that too. And I want to assure you that I'm going to write with compassion, with generosity. And if there are things that you would prefer that I not say that do not censor my ability to tell my truth, I will honor that. But I think it's really, one thing we often don't think about is we'll sort of go off and write a memoir in secret. But you're telling your story, you're also telling the family story. And I think the story that you've just outlined is just deeply wrenching, deeply wrenching. And you simply engage your mother in a conversation about where you are now, who you are now, and why this story is so imperative for you. You're not asking for your mother to give you permission. You're asking your mother to listen to you. You're asking your mother if she would be willing to share her thoughts and feelings. If she's not, that's fine. But I think there are ways to engage family in the process because you don't want to get things wrong. And for example, in the best-selling memoir, Educated, about a young white girl who grew up in Utah among the survivalists, the author does something very interesting. Whenever she's writing a scene where one of her siblings does something violent or physically harmful to her, what she'll do is say, she'll write it from her perspective. And then she'll say, but my brother said he didn't do that. Or my brother remembers it another way. And actually, by including these differing points of view, it does not undercut her narrative voice at all. It simply informs you that you have a family in which people were wedded to their truth, their lies, and their half-truth. So I think you have a great, very powerful story to tell. And I think there are ways for you to write it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, our next question looks like it's going to come from Andy. So you may go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, greetings everyone. Thank you so much for putting this together. And Dr. Golden, I think you may have already gone over this, but I just thought I'd check again. I'm helping someone write their memoir. It's not my memoir. I'm helping, and it's not so much ghostwriting either, but it's not my story. I'm helping someone to tell their story. And I was just wondering, what kind of suggestions would you give in a situation such as that?
Well, I think that you have, if you're helping someone write their story, I would pretend that their story was my story. And I would say, how can I tell this story in the deepest, most authentic way that it will touch the reader? And wherever the person that you're working with is feeling that, well, I can't say that, I can't tell that. Well, you as the writer then get to ask them, why not? And if it's an incident or an anecdote or something that happened that is central to the story, your job then is to work with the author, the subject, to understand why that may fit and how it can be told in a way. Because I think the biggest fear people have about memoir is, oh, my parents, I'll never be able to live in my family again. But that's not always true. I mean, in my memoir, Migrations of the Heart, I wrote about my first husband, and he doesn't come off particularly well, but he was not particularly upset about being in the book. He was excited that he was in a book. He was so egotistical that he didn't care what I wrote. He was just in a book. And so family members and friends can often have unexpected reactions. But if you're the writer, I would say, pretend that this is your book. What do I want in a story? What is the truth I need? What does this person need to reveal? And you're the interviewer. You're pulling it out of them. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next question is going to be coming from Lori Jean Carter.
Hi, Dr. Golden, and it's an honor to just hear you speak. I was a young professor in Pennsylvania trying to get to one of your workshops in DC, and I wasn't able to make it, but I'm here now.
Well, I'm going to read your book.
I'm so happy you're here. And we're actually working on creative nonfiction now in our workshop, and the conversation came up today about revision and what it takes and how long it takes. So could you just give us a little bit of your revision process?
Yeah. Okay, in fact, I can read something, two paragraphs that will talk about revision. When I started this essay, it started like this. I have been teaching classes and workshops on writing memoir for over 3 decades. My first book was a memoir. I've written 2 other books that combine memoir with reportage, as well as numerous personal essays. Now that was how I started. Then when I went back to it, I said, no, you can't start like that, Marita, because that's not an invitation. That's not a seduction. That's not emotional. And so then I wrote another paragraph to begin the story, the piece. And this is how it opens now. I don't know how I'm gonna change this, but writing memoir, I've taken the raw material of my life and mined it for meaning, shaped it into a scream and a balm, unearthed the self I did not know, engraved on each blank page the vocabulary I needed to find myself. to heal myself, to be myself, holding my life in my hands. I have been shaman, magician, and dreamer. No one ever told me there was so much to being me. Now, the first one I read was just facts, as you can see. But once again, as I said to the previous person, I am trying to bring beauty into the world through these sentences. And that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of heart, takes a lot of soul. So I'm satisfied that I'm going to be writing the first draft, and then I'm going to go back, and then go back, and then go back. I'm not in a rush. I mean, nobody's holding a gun in my head. There's no job. This is a passion. So revision, I love revision, because that's where I discover who I can be. That's where I discover how I can write. So the difference between the first one is just facts. The second is I like to say, a seduction.
Thank you.
All right, and the next question is going to be coming from Delmetria. So you may go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, I really love the part you shared where you said you didn't know a lot about your grandmother and you wrote the scene about your mother coming up in her new car. That's the struggle that I'm having with my memoir, is writing about scenes that I was not there for. But those scenes are very important to the story that I'm writing, because I'm writing, the name of my book is Identity Theft, Trying to Find My Balance. And it's about mental illness that is between my grandma, across 2 generations, with my grandmother and then my daughter. And so the scenes that I'm writing with my grandmother, I've interviewed, she has 12 kids. I've interviewed all of my aunts and uncles, and they just tell me moments. They tell me about memories and moments. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I feel like an imposter, and sometimes a flat out liar when I'm having to recreate those scenes, because all they remember are those moments.
Well, you know what? There's a couple of very powerful words that you can use in writing memoir that signal to the reader that this is a journey, this is a mystery, and it's still all true. You can say, I don't remember, but I imagine that. I'm not sure, but I suspect. His memory was fuzzy, but he said. So that you are signaling to the reader that this information is coming from memory, imagination, possibly make-believe, but it's still true. And the reader will accept that. If you're writing about, a parent who's deceased, like I was, you can say, I wonder what my mother, if I hadn't given myself permission to create this thing, I could say, I wonder what she felt the night she left. You see, so those words, which you may think are weak words that undercut the story, actually give the story its mystery, its poetry, because the reader understands that you didn't have a tape recorder at every moment in your life. The reader knows that. The reader is simply looking for a moving, dramatic arc, a connection. And we know the connections are made through faulty lines, a faulty memory, etc. So those are some of the things that you can do.
Okay, thank you very much. That helped a lot.
Okay, so we have about 10 more minutes, and we have some questions in the chat, so I want to respect those people as well. So one of the questions from Alicia, the biggest block for me is a fundamental one. Who would be interested or care about this story?
That's That's the question that I wrestled with. You know, I was writing, who would care? I haven't been to the moon. I wasn't a white president. And yet Maya Angelou had written, you know, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, so that I was already had examples of the ways in which writers take the mundane aspects of our lives and find majesty in them. So it's not a matter of you've had to do something earth-shattering. You have to connect with the reader around the passages that connect us. Growing up, living in a family, trying to figure out where you fit, falling in love. And what elevates that story, what makes the reader care, is the voice, is the writing. The powerful memoirs that we remember them because of the voice. And as long as your voice is detailed, true, honest, brave, the reader will care. Because there aren't but so many stories in the world that we write over and over again. I grew up, I was damaged and wounded. I got over the damage and wound. I fell in love. I fell out of love. I left home. I found my place in the world. So what the reader will care intensely. And you don't have to write, see people think, oh, I have to write like Toni Morrison. I have to write, no, you have to write like you, your strongest voice that you've worked hard for. So you will make the reader care. The language will make the reader care.
Okay, another question in the chat. This is from Dr. Erica L. Williams. How did you make the decision to write several memoirs? At some point, did you think it was one memoir and then you realized that you had to do separate different stories or themes?
Well, I've written one real formal memoir, and that's Migrations. Everything else has been what I call a communal memoir. And clearly, I never get tired of writing about myself. I love me some Rita, and I put Marita in everything. But I think that in the communal memoirs that I've written, I have seen myself speaking to and for and with the Black community. I've seen my experience, whether it was colorism or trying to keep my son safe from violence, or trying to get rid of the Strong Black Woman Complex. I've seen myself as a stand-in for Black people, Black women, Black mothers. And in order to engage the public and the readers, I first have to tell them who I am, my story. So the communal memoir allows me a lot of freedom to, yes, do memoir, but then I can pull back and I can interview someone. I can, in that same structure, I can write an essay. And what I like is the mixed genre of it. But yeah, I mean, in particular, when I wrote Saving Our Sons, which was kind of a memoir of raising my son. It is our story, but mixed in it a story of stories of many other people in the community.
Great, thank you. We have another question in the chat. Can you please talk about memoir endings? Any advice, wisdom, or constructive criticism?
So, memoir endings? Is that the question?
Yes.
Well, usually the memoir has an arc, and it's leading towards a conclusion, not a happy ending. It's leading towards transformation. so that in a memoir, what you're looking for is for all these things that have happened to the subject of the memoir to be experiences that the author writes about with so much understanding that you understand how all those experiences transform them. And so if you want to talk about an ending, the ending would be how they have been enlarged, how they have grown, how they've been tested, how they've been challenged, and who they are at the end is the result of all of that.
Wonderful. Let's go back. We have Andrea. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I was just writing notes, so I just lost my thought. I was just wondering about, you talk about communal and mixed genres. I just was wondering about with structure, because I have a hard time kind of deciding on my structure for my story. I am writing a family memoir that is kind of centers in a childhood witnessing domestic violence and how that impacts the children, and how I was kind of confronted with that as an adult when an uncle who was very close in age to me ended up kind of killing his, well, and he killed his girlfriend. And so then I kind of had to look at my own relationship with quote unquote dangerous men, because like I've never suffered, but I saw other people. But it's kind of, I go back and forth with, should I do this chronological? Should I do it from the event of the murder and go back to the childhood and try to connect it? So I think I'm still kind of sussing out this story, but I was just like, I'm always kind of stuck on structure. And I'm wondering if that the story informs structure or the other way around.
Well, I think it's both.
Okay.
And I think that you want to begin with an incident or narrative that sort of crystallizes the book, that captures. For example, by starting Migrations of the Heart, by talking about my father, that crystallizes one. I grew up in a family where my father was telling me stories, made me a writer. Two, my father kept telling me about Africa. What I do, I grow up and I marry an African. Three, I have this very intense relationship with my father. I'm raised like a boy. So then I grow up to be very independent.
Right.
So that whole thing with my father crystallizes the major themes of the book.
Right.
And so that you want to begin with a narrative or a scene that captures, that crystallizes.
Okay. All right, perfect.
You might want to read Memorial Drive if you haven't.
Oh, I've heard about that.
Yeah, you might
I
want to
haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I would suggest you look at Natasha's book. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question. So I see that Cheryl has her hand raised, so you may ask your question.
Great. Hi, Marita Golden. This is Cheryl Thompson. I had the opportunity to interview you on your Strong Black Women book.
Oh, hi.
Hi, not long ago. Thank you for this. I have a question about structure as well. You talked about the communal memoir, and I'm wondering if communal could include other voices. So what I'm talking about is my two sisters and a cousin are trying to write a memoir of sorts. And what ties it together is that we have the same mother and our mothers were sisters. And so is that wonky? Is that possible to pull that
sounds
together?
Exciting.
Okay.
That sounds exciting. And that's the great thing, that you can stretch the genre, you know, to be what your story needs it to be. So that you can have chapters devoted to each of the women. And then it is literally a communal memoir of this family, of these women in the family. You can have chapters where you're writing about the same thing, how you saw the same thing very differently. So I think that sounds exciting. That sounds very interesting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I think that if you're trying to do something that you haven't seen done before, go ahead and do it. That means it needs to be done, and maybe you're the person who needs to do it.
I like that. We'll take that challenge.
Okay, and I do want to just before we go, I do want to recommend another book in addition to The Art of Memoir by Mary Karr. There's a book that is kind of my writing Bible, and it's called The Art of Slow Writing, Reflections on Time, Craft, and Creativity, The Art of Slow Writing. And it's a book by Louise DeSalvo, who is both a novelist and a psychiatrist. And she's written books about the ways that writing heals. But this book is just a wonderful book about why writing is slow, why good writing has to be slow, and how the fact that it is slow is a deeply spiritual experience. And she's read this about everybody. And so you interact with all these writers who are writing about the process. And then she brings her experience as a psychiatrist and a writer to write about the deepest things that are happening to us as we write, and particularly if we allow ourselves to write slow. And the last thing I'll say is when I was much younger, I wrote a lot more when I would be working on a project. When I'm working on a project now, I sit down to write one page, 250 words. I give myself an hour and that's it. And then I'll go back the next day. And I have found that over the last couple of years that writing slower, I have written actually deeper than I've written deeper faster than when I was writing a lot when I was younger. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you so much, Marita, for spending this evening with all of us. And thank you for all the questions. We ask that if you guys are interested in future events, please visit our website, www.hurstonwright.org. Just put it in the chat. And once again, we are just so honored and pleased to have you with us this evening, Marita, and we wish everyone a safe rest of the week.
Take care, guys. Right on.